Shalom from Jerusalem. This is Powers in Play, our monthly edition of a panel discussion dealing with not only regional issues, but also global ones. And today, Syria is on the agenda a couple of months after the Assad regime collapsed, and there is a new boy in town, namely Ahmed al-Sharaa, aka al-Julani, who has installed himself as the de facto ruler and has promised a new constitution and presidential elections in which a surprise candidate will emerge, namely Ahmed al-Sharaa, and he has to deal with both domestic issues as well as foreign policy and national security ones, impacting on Israel, the region, and eventually perhaps the entire world. With us, a distinguished group. On this side, former military. On this side, former senior officials from the civilian side of the government, but having dealt with security issues, intelligence, and the like. So, retired or reserve Colonel Eran Lerman, Dr. Eran Lerman. Retired. Finally retired. Not tired, but retired.
Yeah, true enough.
Welcome, Eran. Reserve Brigadier General Yossi Kuperwasser, formerly...
Generals never retire.
Generals never retire. Always, it's like the old cartoons regarding people with stars on their pajamas. But that this is not the case with Yossi, I presume. I've never seen you in a pajama. So General Kuperwasser, formerly, among other positions, the head of the military Directorate of Intelligence, Directorate of Military Intelligence in the IDF.
Research.
Yes.
Research.
I haven't even gotten to the end of the sentence. Yes, the Research and Assessment Division of Military Intelligence. Other positions, Dr. Lerman, I haven't mentioned, among other positions in military intelligence, but also the deputy head of the National Security Staff. So thank you, both of you, my left flank. And on this side, Dr. Uzi Arad, formerly the head of the National Security First Council, then staff, a political advisor to...
Foreign policy.
Foreign policy, not political.
Of course not.
Political in that sense, to Prime Minister Netanyahu, and a former intelligence division chief for Mossad.
Research,
yes. Hopefully, by the end of this program, we will go over all of your resumes. And finally, half of the program is over already, former ambassador and former deputy foreign minister Danny Ayalon, used to work with Dr. Arad in the Prime Minister's office on policy, not politics, and then the ambassador to Washington, Israel's most important foreign policy post, and deputy foreign minister under a distinguished diplomat, Avigdor Lieberman. So, welcome to all of you. So, Syria, General Kuperwasser, when you were in uniform, Syria used to be the biggest threat Israel had after the peace with Egypt, and while Jordan had excellent relations with Israel, also a peace partner, Syria remained adamant, very hostile. Is it no longer so now that the Assad dynasty is out?
Well, a lot has changed. First of all, looking backwards, we should remember that after Egypt concluded a peace agreement with Israel, what Syria did was, simultaneously there was a revolution in Iran, what Syria did was making an alliance with the Iranians. and became a part of the Iranian axis and actually played a major role in the Iranian axis and enabled the Iranians to reach Lebanon and to arm Hezbollah to its teeth and to even send some weapons southwards toward Jordan on its way to Palestinians in the Judea and Samaria area, which is still going on. And Syria played a major role in this context. It didn't fight Israel directly. It kept the peace and the agreements with Israel very nicely, but at the same time it enabled the Iranians to build their axis. What happened now is that this very important bridge that enables the connection between Iran and Lebanon, Iran, other places, was destroyed. Not broken, but destroyed. And we have Syria under a different rule now, that right now is busy with other things than fighting Israel. And because of that, it is an opportunity. It's also a threat. It's a challenge because it's part of the Muslim, the Sunni radical axis in the Middle East, led by Turkey. But it's also an opportunity because they understand that they are weak, and Israel took clear steps in order to make sure that everybody understands they are weak. We sort of destroyed most of the weapons they could have had. And we even took control of the demilitarized zone, a little bit more than that, along the border to make sure that they don't come close to us and pose a threat in the Golan Heights. And because of that, the kind of threats that were emanating from Syria in the past do not exist right now.
So you describe it as a 50-50 proposition. When you flip a coin, on which side do you come? Positive or negative?
It depends on us, and I prefer the positive side. I think we have an opportunity here more than a threat, and we should make the most out of it.
Dr. Lerman, you are nodding, hopefully not out of boredom.
No, because I'm thinking to myself, when I was 50 years ago, February 75, I joined the IDF, and soon enough found myself with earphones on my head, listening to Syrian military units, which no longer exist. The Syrian military, with its 12 standing divisions, was for many years the threat of reference for the IDF. And, since the fighting terrain would have been extremely difficult, we looked...
So it's like Vietnamese linguists in the US government following the end of the war, unemployed.
Sort of. Syria is no longer the military threat that it was, and as General Kovas mentioned, Israel took out the remainder of the Syrian Air Force. The air defenses, which used to be the densest air defense missile system in the world, all of this has been taken out.
Strategic weapons.
All the strategic weapons. The chemical weapon industry was already destroyed earlier in some parts because the Iranians had a finger in it, and so we went in with some really amazing raids that, one day would be the matter of Hollywood films. And I don't see how Turkey, with all its basic hostility of the Erdogan government towards Israel, can actually invest in turning Syria, the wreckage of Syria, into an effective threat again. So the gain is extremely important. Moreover, Syria has been ruined almost to the ground. My Syrian friends in exile used to say that the Assad regime would burn the wet with the dry to the ground in order to survive in government. And much of Syria is in ruins. About a third, more than 500,000 people died, hundreds of thousands maimed, millions displaced. Turkey's first priority is to be able to bring the millions, literally millions of Syrian refugees back into Syria. And now that because Assad would never have allowed them back. They are Sunni, by and large, and he enjoyed the fact that the Alawites turned from 10 to 15% to something like 25% of the Syrian population. Now the Turks would work to reverse this. All of this needs money, investment, stability. Nobody invests that kind. The Turkey doesn't have that kind of money. The Saudis have, which is why Giuliani has already paid his respects in Mecca. By the way, was allowed into the Kaaba. So the Saudis know how to play a devout Sunni to their purposes. None of this sits well with renewed tensions with Israel.
So, Dr. Arad, your dream has come true. You are being appointed for the duration of this program back in either of your old jobs, or as policy advisor to Netanyahu, or as head of the national security staff. And you have to develop a policy paper, recommendations to the cabinet, not necessarily to Netanyahu personally, regarding what should Israel do in order to cultivate this new regime in Damascus, but leave out, please, the Washington angle, because we are keeping it for Danny Ayalon.
Good. Well, I would not hesitate to try to reflect on that question, even without being promised my dreams coming true, because I already got my pension. And as you know, it's the pension that counts, not the job. But things have changed in the Middle East. There has been something like everything was reshuffled. And there is certainly, we cannot extrapolate anything. So we are now looking at what is happening, and we see some commotion, which will be discussed later when it comes to America, about rearranging the cards. But I noticed with great interest that even when Netanyahu has an agenda to discuss with Trump, the issues mentioned are the following. First, of course, Palestinians, Gaza, hostages. Then the possibility of a regional normalization with Saudi Arabia. I don't hear that on the agenda was either Syria or Lebanon. But if we are in the mood of trying to rebuild or rearrange things, what is the desirable thing? You said opportunities present themselves. What indeed should be our policy? So, and here is my reflection. Even if it is not, Syria is in bad shape, true. All the things that Eran had said are all true. But at the same time, it is a regime that has its origin in the extremist flank. Even recently, they kept repeating their commitment to liberate Jerusalem and things like that. And in principle, we do not want, over the long term, to have in our immediate vicinity a country, however feeble, which is clearly of the hostile and potentially, should circumstance allow, could turn against us as a proxy of somebody else or anything. So this, in a way, calls for, as you said, some creative diplomacy. That is to say, do we have, if we were to be able to influence events in Syria, what is the process that we want to go about? Do we want to, to come to some kind of a quiet? But still it's a hostile presence and potentially dangerous in Syria. Or we do take part in the game, which others are participating, to try to shape or to regain a foothold that others are doing. And so should we. So what kind of Syria do we want in 2, 5, 10 years from now, so as not to do something that we'll regret not having done before? Now, this connects to Lebanon. Of course, now the Syrian presence in Lebanon is much reduced indirectly. But then also Lebanon calls for some efforts to make something and a deal. And that, too, has been absent from the agenda discussed by Trump and Netanyahu. So my question is, what are we to do, Israeli statecraft, Israeli activity, when all this process of rearranging the geometry and the architecture of the Middle East so that these two countries, which are in the immediate vicinity And we've learned a lesson. Those who border on us matter to us more than those who do not. That both Lebanon and Syria do not turn into something that inadvertently becomes another type of a threat.
Danny Ayalon, are all interests, American and Israeli, aligned, or is there some divergence between the view from Washington and from Jerusalem?
I'm afraid there is some divergence because given the fact that Syria is broken totally, and I don't think it can be re-glued together, given the fact that it may become, because it cannot be glued together, it can become a playground for regional, maybe even global forces, which is right in our front yard, not even our backyard. Israel's interest, of course, is to have over there stability. First, I would say our first interest is that Iran, which is trying desperately, but without much success so far, that Iran will not gain or regain influence over Syria. It's important for Israel to keep the territorial bridge between Iran and the Mediterranean broken. On the other hand, there is a risk that the Turks, on the other side, and they so far have, I would say, an intrinsic advantage, given the fact that their militias, the Sunni militias, which was backed by Turkey, they are now commanding the power over there. I think it's Israel's interest that we will not have a shared border with Turkey or Turkish interests. By the way, it was quite interesting that about 30 years ago, a very renowned scholar, the late Bernard Lewis, said that in due time, Iran will become Turkey and Turkey will become Iran. And under Erdogan, there is a good chance.
And what would Israel become?
And what Israel would become, maybe the United States.
Judea.
In any case, so Israel's interest is, of course, that first of all, Iran will not be there. Secondly, that if Turkey is there, it's not close to our border. That the Kurds are having a strong hand. That the Druze are having strong hand because these two minorities are Israel's, I would say, natural allies. And from the United States point of view, I'm not sure that they want to even hear about Syria, certainly when it comes to the isolation of Trump. So if given to their own device, I'm afraid that the Turks can really take the advantage of Trump looking elsewhere and take over. So this is the main divergence between Israel and Washington. So Israel will have, I would say, a very uphill task to make Washington not forget the Turks.
Dr. Lerman, you're a dedicated scholar and expert on the Middle East, going back to antiquity. And as you well remember, the first peace feeler after the armistice talks ended in 1949, only a few months later, where with Syria, with Hosni Zaim, who was barely in power before
being assassinated.
And
There's
therefore,
a great skit in Israeli tradition, Shaykh Ophir, the old comedian, about the revolutions in Syria. Every 11 months there was...
Yes, Shishakli, Samir Hinawi, and all of those.
Oh, yes. I once came across an American document of a discussion with General Dayan, who was then, I think, deputy chief of staff, telling the American embassy in Tel Aviv at the time about his talks with Shishakli. He says, but please don't share this with Foreign Minister Sharet. He should know nothing about it. So that Israel has not changed much since.
And this came right after the armistice agreement with Syria, which was the most difficult part of the negotiation. With
the only one under which an Arab country was left in possession of territory
across
the river, which was not scheduled to be part of, which was scheduled to be part of the Jewish state under 47.
So the question is, here we are, some 76 years later, no peace between Israel and Syria. Is it possible, under new management in Damascus, that Syria would join Egypt and Jordan rather than Lebanon in 1983, as the Begin government hoped, but then was torpedoed by Syria? Could Syria become Israel's third peace partner in the adjacent area? We're not talking about countries who do not border Israel.
The long answer is no way, and the short answer is no. For a very simple reason. I don't see an Israeli government, any Israeli government, in the foreseeable future, willing to take the risks involved of handing back the Golan Heights.
So it's not the product, it's the cost.
It is the cost. But it's also the product in the sense that no Syrian government is going to be strong enough in this semi-chaotic reality that the fall of Assad left behind, strong enough to force through such a decision. And the Golan Heights have become an organic part of Israel, recognized as such by the United States of America. And I believe down the road, in 2 generations, that the Syrians may come to treat this as they treat the loss of Antakya, when the French handed over a piece of their Syrian mandatory territory to Turkey, and it remains Turkish territory. I was told that
Iskandarun.
Once upon a time, when Turks came to visit Syrian officers, that the maps had to be turned to the wall because in Syria they continued to draw the border as it was before 1938. But one day they will come to terms with an Israeli Golan. I don't see an Israeli government under any circumstances nowadays suggesting the return of the Golan to Syrian sovereignty.
I'd like to add to this something.
Go ahead.
Well, I've been involved in some of those indirect dialogues with the Syrians, but let's think creatively and positively and possibly optimistically. We have in America a president that if there is anything that he really specializes in is real estate, and who likes to make deals, a deal. So there you have the grand deal. The deal that had been thought about at one time was the concept of land swaps. Now he is engaged in demographic swaps, but the geographic swaps. And the usual suggestion was that we retain the eastern part, the western part of the Golan Heights. We stay on top. Most of the Israeli population.
On top of the cliffs.
On top of the cliff, the elevated side, all from the Al-Khamma all the way to the Hermon. And the eastern part will be in a condition of glorious peace, will be handed over. But how will that be done? The Syrians will be compensated for that by being given land from Jordan, because Jordan has a lot to offer.
And Jordan will get some from Saudi Arabia and so forth.
Where? No, but where was Jordan would get 10 miles at the Red Sea. So you see the coast. So the elements of a redrawing of the borders all across from all sides has been there. And the idea of a swap had been codified.
Who drew these?
Not bigger. Wait a minute. Clinton
Eran,
talked about swaps. But I can tell you the following thing. When the negotiations started under Bibi, he floated the idea of a swap, but he checked before with the Jordanians. Would you be willing, in a future context, blah, blah, in the long term, be willing to do that? The answer was yes from Jordan. So then Fred Hoff and Dennis Ross brought it up with the Syrians, at which point they say, no.
But
things have changed.
As you well remember, the American interlocutor was Ron Lauder.
No, that was 10 years before.
Yes,
I'm talking about.
You're talking about the second, yes, but in the 90s, I'm mentioning Ron Lauder because he's credited now with coming up with the idea of Greenland being taken over by the United States, which Trump heartily
Wait a minute, he
adopted.
gave that
Louder, yes. But hold on for a second.
By the way, I think it's a great idea. And if it has to be populated, you know who the candidates are.
Of course, the Greenlanders, yes. Out of the Green Line. But hold on for
Well,
a
the
second.
Iranians have already suggested the Israelis should be deported to
Rank has its privileges, and the most senior officer here is General Kupavasser, who is very politely silent. So a question to you, Yossi. The Russian role. Russia, of course, penetrated Syria in the 1950s. It was important for it, among other reasons, because it bordered, still does, Turkey, a NATO country. It leapfrogged over a NATO country thereby, and it wants to remain, to have its bases, both naval and air. What is the Syrian role, the Russian role going to be in Syria, now in the new Syria?
Well, first of all, referring to your question, I don't think that Russia is going to play an important role in Syria right now because there's a history here, and for al-Sharaa to cooperate with Russia, it's going to be very difficult. They were shooting at him just recently.
And he wants Assad to be extradited.
That's the way to...
No, but this is much like Khomeini wanted the United States to extradite the Shah.
That's
but he
an
will
excuse
not
to fend
dare
off
take
the
Russian
Russians.
No.
For Russia, it's very important to keep the bases, but I'm not sure that they're going to be able to do that.
They're still there in Tartus?
They're still there, but they're on the way out. He tells them where to go to.
They're packing.
Yeah, so it's and if they're going to stay there, they're going to pay a price. It's not going to be for free. Russia is amongst the losers of what happened, and they knew they were going to lose because it was their decision not to help Assad stay in power. I think that coming back to the question of flexibilities of Syria and the future of Syria, what do we expect from Syria? I think, first of all, we expect to make sure that, and this is a common ground between us and the Turks and maybe al-Sharaa too, we want to make sure that Iran is not coming back in any way or form, and that Syria doesn't play the role of bridge between Iran and Hezbollah. This is extremely important for us. And it's something that they would agree to. And we understand that there are some concerns of the Turks regarding the Kurds. Up to a certain point, we can it's not so much about us, but the Americans and us can live with that as long as somebody on the other side is showing respect to our concerns about the Druze in the southern part. And we know that the Druze don't like Sharaa too much.
They don't want to give up their weapons to the central government and army as he is insisting.
Exactly. So I think that there's a common denominator here. And, there is a Costa Rica example that Sharaa doesn't really need an army now. So he's recruiting a lot of people to serve in the domestic security apparatuses that he's going to form. But he doesn't really need an army. It's a huge expenditure to build an army, and who's going to finance it? And he just needs domestic security. That's what he needs. So I think that we can definitely go along with that. Now, about the creativity needed in order to work out the Golan Heights, I think such creativity can be brought up.
As long as the high ground remains under.
As long as the high ground remains under. Just like everybody else here, I would participate in the negotiations and was involved in how do we make the circle squared. And there were all kinds of ideas. We can work them out. Definitely, if we are going to make progress, considerable progress in the context of normalization of the relations between us and Saudi Arabia, because Sharaa understands that's not by incident that he went to Saudi Arabia. He understands the money is going to come from there.
And he is a relative of Farouk al-Sharaa, who used to be Hafez Assad's foreign minister.
Yeah. So, and I think he was raised in Saudi Arabia for a while. So he has the understanding that he needs the Saudis, and this can be a part of a wider package, broader package that will deal also with Syria. He says, I'm not against establishing peace between us and Israel. I mean, I know that there are a lot of people underneath him that shout, let's go to Jerusalem. Yes, it's a very
As tourists, they may come.
It's a very unstable situation. We have to look very carefully at what's going on and not commit to anything that would in the future endanger our security. But there's ground here for moving forward and creating some understandings that may make us able to take advantage of the opportunities that the situation presents.
And whoever rules Damascus always remembers that the Israeli border is a mere 1 hour's drive by tanks, 40 kilometers or so from the Syrian capital. And they are more exposed
it's
and
beyond
vulnerable.
that. It's beyond that. That's one element, the geographical element. But Israel is now going to adopt, at many fronts, also on the Syrian front, a totally different security concept.
Deployment.
Forward deployment and
Preventive action.
coercive activity in order to prevent the building of threats. That's what we're going to do in Lebanon for sure. I hope also in Gaza, and probably also in Syria. And people have to take that into account because we learned the lessons. There was a 7th of October, something that is going to affect the entire Middle East and definitely Israel's security policy.
Colonel Lerman, a few days ago, Ahmed al-Sharaa appeared on Syrian television. He focused mostly on domestic affairs, but he also revealed that only a few days after he defeated Assad, a senior American military, he said Western military officer, came to see him and told him, knew how to flatter him, told him that the swift and decisive victory that his forces had over the Assad military were fantastic, that this officer watched from afar through satellites and drones the way the battle developed, and then this officer stood up and took one of his medals from his chest and presented it to al-Sharaa. This is all the al-Sharaa account. But obviously, the Western military and intelligence services would like to have some channel directly with al-Sharaa. And perhaps we are all living now under CENTCOM, the U.S. Central Command. The suggestion was that this was a senior CENTCOM officer, even though they usually wear fatigues. There is no place for ribbons and medals, but the story is much more illustrious this way. What's your view?
Look, CENTCOM and the American military establishment generally, I think, have, over the last year or so, been quite focused on the Iranian challenge, the Iranian threat, Iranian proxy warfare in the Red Sea, the Houthis, the Iranian attacks on Israel that CENTCOM was directly involved in let's say, reducing. And therefore, the fall of the most important brick in the Iranian wall, the fall of the Assad regime, was certainly looked upon positively by the American defense establishment. Moreover, it was as we increasingly look at the world in terms of the West, I don't know to what extent Trump is going to keep the West together or break it apart.
Western Hemisphere only.
The traditional forces of what used to be called the free world versus the CRINC, the China, Russia, Iran, North Korea sort of alliance. They are suffering. The axis of axis of evil, and you're looking at defeat after defeat, and Syria is an extremely important point because for a long time for Russia, Syria was the display of, look, who do you want to gamble on, America or Russia? Mubarak has been thrown out of the window like a dead cat, and I kept Assad in power, said Putin.
Until Ukraine.
And then things have started changing. The North Koreans apparently have left the field in the Kursk sector with thousands of dead. Apparently, they didn't know what they were walking
Yeah,
into.
but with combat experience, this is what they came from.
Well, not the best combat experience.
Those who survived.
So all of this adds to something which is positive, definitely positive from an American perspective. Now, certainly you want to have a channel of conversation with the new regime. The big question is, of course, is he going to become a Turkish proxy or an independent player? The move he made to Saudi Arabia indicates at least a wish to remain a player. By the way, the Chinese are very worried because there's an element of Uyghur terrorists, as they call it, among the HTS ranks. So are the Egyptians. The Egyptians have put pressure on Julani or Shah, but his name après de guerre, Norm après de guerre, to actually make sure that Egyptian terrorists and militants do not play a role in the new Syrian military or security forces. So there are many players with an interest, and it is certainly important that the West should have an informal but effective channel. And well, if it involves some strange compliments, so be it.
Ambassador Ayalon, going back to the Washington perspective, or especially Trump perspective, in his first term, he wanted to take the remainder of the U.S. military presence out of Syria. He had a fight with his first Secretary of Defense, Mattis, over it. Mattis won, but was relieved, and then Trump changed his mind and kept the several hundred servicemen there. Now there are some 2,000 guarding ISIS detention facilities. But he's probably going to reevaluate and perhaps take them out. What will happen to the fight with ISIS? And ISIS, of course, wants Asham too, Syria, not only the Levant in general. What will happen?
Yeah, I think his inclination has not changed. And probably this first opportunity he can, probably he will bring back the troops in Syria. The question is, who will replace them? And for that, I think two things have to happen. First of all, Israel's continued pressure on Hezbollah with the US. And with that, I think the chance is that the Turks, would gain more prominence and more influence. And here, I think Trump can strike a deal with Erdogan. That Erdogan, if you can believe it or not, whether you leave the cat to guard the cream, that Erdogan will promise him to take care, that will guard the Kurdish interests. Will that happen? I don't know.
But good that you said a cat, because unlike the Iranians, Turkey has a tail, a heavy economic tail that can be twisted if necessary.
By Trump? By the benevolent Trump?
He did.
Twisting arms regarding aid?
Perish the thought. He did this on a much more minor issue.
Colombia.
Uzi?
To the Turks in his previous administration over Brunson.
Uzi Arad, there are two issues which were briefly touched upon here, at least by inference. One is the HTS designation as a foreign terrorist organization, and especially al-Sharaa, personally. And the other is sanctions on Syria, going back to the Assad regime. The Europeans have already indicated that they are willing to reassess and relieve Syria from these burdens. Will it happen? Will the Americans let it happen?
I think, with the kind of flexibility today that people have with everything, they can change that. I think there would be this tolerance shown. And mind you, with Syria, they have also other issues, so they're concerned about all those Syrian refugees and the idea of the return to Syria of refugees and so forth. I don't think there would be much pressure, but perhaps incentives will be provided, still in an effort not only to stabilize Syria, but to make it, in fact, cross the lines and become a member, if only passive, of the anti-Iranian bloc. Now, let's at least learn one lesson about U.S. and Syria. I remember when Kerry, as Foreign Secretary and Secretary of State, used to go to Damascus and bombard us with praise to Assad and that the man is a Western educated civilian and that he lionized him. Now, when you see the real, what he did, he was perhaps one of the nastiest presences here in the Middle East.
Well, as you know, the moderator here is allowed one pun a program. So thank you all for a very serious discussion. Thank you, Eran Lerman, Yossi Cooper-Wasser, Uzi Arad, Danny Ayalon, and we will be back next month with another edition of Powers in Play. For the time being, Shalom from Jerusalem.